Hello, Mr. Hardy here, and in this video I would like to teach you about Stave 2 of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. So as per usual, I'll start by summarising the plot. We can then explore the key characters, themes, contexts and quotes you may want to memorise for your assessment, and I'll leave you with a couple of tasks you can complete at the end of the video to solidify your learning. So let's jump in with the plot. What actually happens in Stave 2 of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens? Well, the main character Scrooge wakes up and he is confused by the time. The clock has struck 12 on a nearby church, but it can't be 12 midday because it's dark outside, so it must be 12 midnight, which means Scrooge has slept through the entire day into the night, which is quite unusual. And this sets up the tone and it foreshadows the unusual events that will happen in this stave. So at the stroke of 1, as predicted by the ghost of Jacob Marley, Scrooge is visited by the first of the three spirits, and we call this spirit the ghost of Christmas past. Now this ghost appears both young and old at the same time, and sometimes it has lots of limbs and sometimes it has very few limbs. So its shape shifts and there's some contradictions about it: old and young, many limbs and few limbs. One thing is quite constant about it: it wears a white tunic, and the colour white is symbolic of innocence and purity and goodness. So this is a good ghost. The ghost also carries flowers. In one hand it carries holly, which is a flower that's quite symbolic of winter, specifically Christmas. And in the other hand it carries summer flowers, which again is a contradiction. It's a ghost of summer and winter. Now obviously it's a ghost of the past, so it's the ghost of every season of every year. Amidst the contradictions and contrasts, there is another common idea with the ghost, and that is it has a light that erupts from its head. So its head is a beacon of light, and that is constant throughout. The light shines from his head, and the light is symbolic of the truth, like enlightening people who look at it about themselves. So the ghost of Christmas past first takes Scrooge to the countryside where he grew up, and Scrooge sees children from his youth, and the children are saying Merry Christmas to each other and they're being happy, and this sets Scrooge in a good mood. He wants to say Merry Christmas to them too, and he starts to feel happy. So throughout this journey of the past, the ghost then takes Scrooge to his old school, where we see Scrooge is alone at Christmas time with only book characters for company. Now if you watched my previous video about Stave 1, you'll know that isolation is a key theme in this book. So we see that Scrooge as a child was quite isolated. He was lonely, he didn't have friends, so his only friends were book characters like Ali Baba, the Sultan and the Genie. When Scrooge sees his younger self as a boy who's sad, his heart starts to change, and he says to the ghost of Christmas past that he wishes he could have treated the young caroling boy in Stave 1 differently. In Stave 1, a young boy came to Scrooge's counting house door to sing Christmas carols, and Scrooge brandished a ruler and scared the boy away. But now he realises maybe that boy was lonely like he was when he was a kid, and he wishes he could have treated him differently. Scrooge is starting to change. Next, the ghost shows Scrooge another Christmas scene at school. This time he's a bit older, and this time Scrooge's little sister Fan has come to take him home to father. So we've talked about isolation. In this video, in a little bit later, I'll talk about the theme of family, but here we get this idea of family. Scrooge has a family, has a father, and has a sister, Little Fan. But sadly, Little Fan dies quite young, but she does leave a son, and that son is Fred. Fred calls Scrooge Uncle Scrooge, so Fred is actually Fan's son, and Fan is Scrooge's sister, so Fred is Scrooge's nephew. And this gets Scrooge thinking about how he treated Fred. In Stave 1, Fred wished him a Merry Christmas and invited him over for a Christmas party, and Scrooge said humbug to Christmas, and he kept saying good afternoon to Fred to try and chase him out of his counting house. But now he wishes he treated Fred differently. Again, he's beginning to change. The ghost then takes Scrooge to see his old master called Fezziwig during Christmas time. Now, in the Victorian era, it was quite common to have a master and an apprentice. So this meant that when you finished school, you'd go and work with someone who was an expert in their trade. Maybe their trade was carpentry or being a tailor or hat making. And what you would do is you would live with your master, and in exchange for board and lodgings, in exchange for somewhere to sleep and some food, the master will teach you his trades so that when you grow up, you could maybe set up your own carpentry shop or tailoring shop or hat making shop. Now, importantly, Fezziwig at Christmas time throws a big party and makes everyone, including his employees, which were Scrooge and another boy called Dick, which is a nickname for Richard. He makes them very happy. And actually the ghost tries to criticise Fezziwig and says, look, he didn't do much, he just spent a few of your mortal pounds. It's not a big deal. And Scrooge is very quick to defend Fezziwig and says, no, it's not about the money, it's about how you make people feel. And this is where Scrooge again shows a sign of wanting to change, because he tells the ghost of Christmas past that he wishes he could have treated his clerk differently. His clerk was freezing in the cell with only one coal to keep him warm. When the clerk wanted Christmas Day off, Scrooge was very rude to him, saying you've got to come even earlier on Boxing Day to make up for it. And Scrooge is beginning to regret his actions. Next, on the tour of Scrooge's past, the ghost of Christmas past takes Scrooge to see his breakup with his then fiancée Belle. So Belle and Scrooge were engaged. They met when both of them were poor. But Belle is now breaking up with Scrooge because he now loves material wealth more than her. She's seen him change from a man who loves her to a man who loves money more than her. And she doesn't want to marry this kind of man. So Scrooge is quite heartbroken, reliving this breakup. But then the ghost shows Scrooge a later Christmas in Belle's household. And we see that Belle has lots of laughing children. She has a husband who might not be as rich as Scrooge, but he brings the children presents and he loves Belle and they have a very happy household. And we see that this family have lots of emotions of happiness, emotions of love. And then what we do is we can compare it as readers to the description of Scrooge in his home, which is lonely and dark. There are no children, there are no presents, there are no other people, there are no real emotions other than sadness. And what we learn, and what Scrooge learns importantly, is that you should value family over money. And Scrooge is beginning to regret valuing money over family. Because at the end of the day, some coins, some notes, some numbers in a bank isn't going to make you as happy as family is. And that's one of Dickens' key messages that we will explore later. So towards the end of Stave 2, Scrooge is overcome by emotions. Having a tour of his past has brought up a lot of emotions. He doesn't want any more, so he tries to use a cap, an extinguisher cap, to cover the ghost of Christmas past's head. Because remember, it releases a light, and that light is a metaphor for the truth. So the ghost of Christmas past has come to shed some truth about Scrooge, but Scrooge doesn't want to see the truth. He wants to extinguish it and cover it up with the cap. But importantly, Scrooge cannot extinguish its light. The truth is a lesson that's going to sink into Scrooge whether he likes it or not. Exhausted, Ebenezer Scrooge falls asleep. And that brings us to the end of Stave 2. So we've got a few key characters to explore. The first one I want to look at is the ghost of Christmas past. So I touched upon it in the summary. This is a ghost of contradictions. It looks like a child, but it also looks like an old man. It has a face that sometimes has wrinkles, sometimes it doesn't have wrinkles. What is constant is that it wears a white tunic, which is symbolic of goodness. and it has a light, a bright clear jet of light from its head, which is symbolically and metaphorically the light of truth, your past truth. Scrooge, almost immediately when he meets the ghost, says, "Can you please cover the light from your face?" Scrooge likes to live in darkness. He doesn't want light being shed on his life. And the ghost immediately says, "Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light I give?" Because the ghost knows the light, the truth, is very important in Scrooge changing. When Scrooge asks, "Why have you come to help me, ghost?" the ghost says, "I've come for your reclamation." This is the idea of reclaiming a soul. So a soul is the non-physical part of you. It's sort of your thoughts and emotions. And the idea is, if you have a bad soul, you've done evil in this world, you end up in hell. And this is a Christian idea. And if you've done good in this earth, you will end up in heaven. So Scrooge is on the road to hell. He's greedy, he's selfish. So the ghost says, my role today is to reclaim your soul, to take your soul out of the hands of Satan in hell and give it back to God in heaven. Basically, to transform you. And at the end, when Scrooge tries to hide the light, which is symbolic of the truth, he could not hide it. The truth shines through the darkness. Scrooge has built a life of darkness, but the truth is going to shine through and change him, shed light on Scrooge. So another key character is Scrooge himself. We learn a few things about him. As a child, he was solitary and neglected by his friends, and that feeds into the theme of isolation I touched on in the Stave 1 video. Scrooge wept to see his poor forgotten self, so he cries when he sees his childhood. So he's had quite a traumatic childhood, which may begin to explain why he's the grumpy, selfish old man that we see in Stave 1. But there is hope. He shows signs of changing. He says, "I should have liked to have given him something." This is referring to the boy who was Christmas carolling. And Scrooge says, "I should have liked to have been able to say a word or two to my clerk. So he realises he's made bad actions in the past, he's having some regrets, and he's showing signs of wanting to change. And this is the truth, the light the ghost wants to shed on him to try and get him to change. More key characters. There's Little Fan and there's Fezziwig. Now Little Fan, I believe, Dickens uses as a symbol for happiness. She kisses Scrooge, she claps her tiny hands, she laughs again. I think Dickens might be giving a message to his Victorian readership about being happy and joyful, and how about this could be a cure for many aspects and many ills in Victorian society. I think Fezziwig Dickens uses as a symbol of a good employer. Fezziwig is a very happy, upbeat employer. He says exclamations like yo ho and hilly ho. He sounds very jolly and happy. And Fezziwig's also a very generous employer. When he throws his Christmas party, Dickens writes that in came, and this phrase gets repeated like an anaphora at the start of the sentence. In came these people, in came those people, in came this person, in came that person. And it gives like a listing effect to show just how many people Fezziwig welcomed in to his home, just how many people Fezziwig blessed with his money and his Christmas cheer. And I think Dickens is trying to use Fezziwig as a model for Victorian factory owners. So remember, in the Victorian era, the Industrial Revolution was happening, and a lot of factory owners exploited their workers, especially in places like workhouses, which is something we touched on in the previous video. There was a lot of exploitation from the employer to the employee, and I think Dickens is showing his Victorian readership, look, this is what a good employer does. Be like Fezziwig. And I think Scrooge could learn from both characters. He could learn from Little Fan about being joyful and happy and valuing family, and he can learn from Fezziwig how to be a good employer and treat his employees well. A final character I want to explore is Belle, and I believe that Dickens uses Belle as a symbol for family. When the master of the house, Belle's husband, not Scrooge, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother, Here Dickens paints the image of a perfect family. A man returns home from work, his daughter leans on him, he sits with his family and his wife, and there's human connection, and there's joy, and there's happiness. All the things Scrooge doesn't have. Why? Because instead Scrooge chose his golden idol, his master passion, gain. Now, going back to this idea of Christianity, in the Bible it warns about idols, which are things that distract you from God. And here Scrooge has a golden idol, which is literally gold, money, and his master passion, gain. Now, sometimes you'll find when you read A Christmas Carol that some words have capital letters when grammatically they shouldn't, and it could be for various reasons, but I would argue in some situations, like this one, Dickens might be doing it to either emphasise a word or maybe personify an idea. The idea that gain is a physical entity, a person, a thing, and this is now Scrooge's new master, instead of more Christian ideas such as generosity, family, happiness. Okay, let's move on to themes. In the previous video I looked at the theme of isolation. In this video let's look at the theme of family. Scrooge has no family, and this makes him miserable. He even rejects Fred when Fred offers to be his family and to invite him over for a Christmas party. Scrooge loses his apprenticeship family, his work family, when he leaves Fezziwig's apprenticeship. Scrooge loses his biological family when little Fan, his sister, dies. So Scrooge is really lacking in family. And he has a chance to make his own family with Belle, but he chooses collecting money over making a family with Belle. So Scrooge has lost his family on so many counts. He now has no family at all, and this is the source of his misery. So what can we learn from this? Well, Dickens is promoting the idea that family is the solution for many of Victorian Britain's problems. Problems such as poverty can be sorted by families working and supporting each other. Problems such as crime, problems such as morality dipping down, all of these things Dickens is suggesting can be fixed with the idea of a strong core family. Another theme to look at is wealth. So in my previous video I looked at poverty, so now let's look at the opposite, wealth. It's important to note that in A Christmas Carol, Dickens doesn't expressly say that wealth is bad. What Dickens is trying to present is how you use your wealth that determines whether it's good or bad. For example, Dickens presents wealth both positively and negatively. He presents it negatively with the ghost of Jacob Marley, who's bound by chains and has to drag around things like safes and ledgers and money purses and cash boxes. Clearly, wealth has had a negative effect on Marley because he's gathered it and stored it and kept it for himself. Another negative effect of wealth is on Scrooge when he pursues wealth over family. So clearly Dickens is suggesting if you put wealth as your number one priority and you're selfish and you make it all for yourself, it can be negative. However, wealth can also be used positively. For example, the charity collectors who go around raising money for the poor. This is money being used to help other people. This is good as far as Dickens is concerned. Another example would be Fezziwig. As a good employer, he spends some of his money, £3 or £4, to put on a Christmas party with a fiddler and with food and drink and dancing, and it brings people cheer. So using your money for charity or using your money to help others, this is an idea that Dickens does promote. So it's important to know that Dickens doesn't say, ooh, wealth is bad, gaining money is bad. Dickens' main message is how you use the money and how you value the money. If you value money over people, that's definitely bad. But if you use your money to help people, well then Dickens is suggesting that's really good. And actually that's one of the main messages he wants his Victorian readership to learn. If you have money, if you're rich, if you're an employer, you should use it to help those less fortunate than you. So let's move on to context. This is the historical knowledge you need to fully appreciate this novella. Let's talk about religion, and specifically Christianity. So in Victorian England, pretty much everyone was Christian. It was the dominant religion. And there's references to this in the text that I'll try and pick out for you. So Marley is a ghost, which means he lives in purgatory, which is a sort of Christian idea. So going back to your soul, the non-physical part of you, when your physical body dies, your soul or your spirit, if it's been good, it goes to heaven. If it's been bad, it goes to hell. And if it's not really clear whether you belong in heaven or hell, you end up in purgatory. And this is where you sort of roam the middle place between heaven and earth, between heaven and hell, so earth, you roam it as a ghost until the day of judgment, and then God will decide, do you belong in heaven with all the good people, do you belong in hell with all the bad people? So this idea of being a ghost living in purgatory, it would have been quite a common idea in the Victorian era because of the largely Christian society. The idea that your soul can be redeemed is based on the idea that Jesus Christ, is the Redeemer. So if you're a terrible person, you've committed many sins, including really bad sins, for example, such as murder, if Christ enters your life, the goodness of Christ can save your soul and actually send you to heaven instead of hell. And this is the idea we see here when the ghost of Christmas Past says to Scrooge, I'm here for your reclamation. It's the idea that he's come along to change Scrooge from being hellbound and redeem him to someone who should go to heaven, a good Christian person. Now, the novella aligns with Christian ideals. Dickens is trying to teach people ideas such as being generous with your money. This is something the Bible teaches with the idea of tithing, or being kind to others. And this is an idea that you'll see Jesus teach in the Bible. Love your neighbours, love your enemies. And this idea of compassion, that God loved the world, he gave Jesus Christ. So Christians should be compassionate and love all people around them. So these Christian ideals are found throughout the text, and references are made to them throughout the text. The other key context to explore is this idea of Christmas. Now, before the Victorian era, Christmas wasn't really celebrated in England. It wasn't a particularly popular festival in Britain. But the Victorians made it popular. And this came about for a few reasons. The first was Queen Victoria and her German husband, Prince Albert. There was an engraving made of them where their family gathered around a Christmas tree and were decorating it. And this really popularised the idea of Christmas trees and decorating trees, and the idea of families gathering together. And in the Victorian era, this novella, A Christmas Carol, was published by Dickens, and it further popularised the idea of getting your family together for Christmas. It also spread those Christian goodwill and moral messages I mentioned earlier, such as generosity, compassion, kindness. And Dickens also popularised some Christmas trends, like the idea of merrymaking. So later on in the novella, we get references to a Christmas meal that involves some kind of meat and vegetables. We get references to Christmas carols, so singing songs. And we get references to Christmas games, playing sort of fun games with your family and friends. And these are traditions that still exist today if you celebrate Christmas in Britain. And all of this came from the Victorian era, and largely from this novella, A Christmas Carol. So let's explore a few quotes before we wrap this video up. The ghost of Christmas Past is described as like a child, as like an old man, white with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle on it. So these contradictions, these contrasts. It did have a tunic of pure white, that was constant, and from the crown of its head, the top of its head, a bright clear jet of light. This light is symbolic of truth. Returning to contrasts, Dickens later writes that sometimes it has 20 legs, sometimes a pair of legs, so elements of the ghost contrast, elements of the ghost are constant. A bit like your memory of the past. Sometimes it's clear, like the light, sometimes it's contradictory and contrasting. When Scrooge asks the ghost, "Why have you come?" the ghost of Christmas past says, "I'm here for your reclamation. I'm here to save your soul." It's a very Christian idea. A solitary child, neglected by his friends, his poor forgotten self. So this is a description of young Scrooge. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should have liked to have given him something. This is the first indication that Scrooge might be changing. I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now. Another indication that Scrooge is changing the way he treats people. Another idol has displaced me, a golden one. I have seen your nobler passions fall off one by one until the master passion gain engrosses you. Scrooge's ex-fiancée Belle says this. So you could pick out words like idol, golden, passion, gain. This clearly shows that Scrooge values wealth over family. He could not hide the light. So this is after Scrooge tries to cover up the ghost of Christmas past's head, to cover up this idea of revealing his past truth, his past light. Very importantly, Scrooge could not hide the light. The lessons of the past cannot be hidden. They're there, they're in the light. You need to learn from them and become a better person. So, what can you do? You can make notes from this video on a physical copy of the novella, and you can answer this question. What does Scrooge learn from the ghost of Christmas past? So the ghost of Christmas past takes Scrooge on a tour of his past. We see him at his school a couple of times. We see him break up with Belle. We see him at his apprenticeship. We see Belle's family. So we see a few different bits of Scrooge's past. What do you think is the main thing the ghost wants Scrooge to learn? Can you back it up with a quote? Within that quote, could you zoom in on a technique or a word that really supports your point? Could you then explain how that quote and technique supports your point? And ideally, can you bring in some of those themes like family, wealth, poverty, isolation? Or can you bring in some context, maybe about Christmas or Christianity or poverty, or what Dickens was trying to achieve with this novella? If you liked this video and found it useful, please give it a like, and please also subscribe to my Mr. Hardy channel for the rest of the Christmas Carol videos, and feel free to leave a comment if you think I missed anything out. Well, thank you for your attention, and I'll see you on the next one.